to spend the next few minutes talking about setting up standards. What are standards? Well, they're everything from line weights, line types, the project units, the title block that you're going to be using. They're how the file looks, what your final product is going to be looking like, and how you get there to a certain degree. So we start out with template files. What are template files? Well, let's flip over to Revit. When you start a project right from opening up Revit, right from the beginning, you click on Projects and you click New. Now, it's just going to open right away right into a project, but who set all this stuff up? Well, if you start a project a different way, you're going to see where the template file really comes into play. So let me shut this one down. I'm going to go to the big R, which is called the Application menu, and then I'm going to go to New, Project, and right away you can see this. This is the dialog box that contains the template file. And this is where you can go in and choose, you can browse what template file you're going to be using. So you want to always make sure that you pick the right unit. So if I'm in a different country or if I'm using, let's say, metric or imperial, you always want to start with the right one for your project because it's something that can be a pain later on to try to change. Although it can be done, it can be a pain. So maybe on this particular one, I'll go to the Canada templates and then I can go to the default metric. I would tend to always recommend the default metric if you're just going to be using the standard templates. Now, if we say OK, all of the settings from that template will now be our starting point in our project file. We're going to be talking about how we can make our own. So let's shut this down. So we're going to speak about how we can make our own template file. So let's go to the big R and we're going to go to Open and we're going to go to Project. And we're going to look for project files, but notice there's star.rvt, that's the Revit project file, and then you have the star.rte, that's the template file. I'm going to open up the default metric. So we're going to do a save as of this template and see what happens. So I'm going to go to the Application menu, Save As, Template, and I'm going to go to our working folder here. We have nothing there yet, so let's put this in. So we're going to call this one 0201, Template, Metric, call this one Complete, because we're going to do a few things to it, and then when we're done, we'll save it, and it'll mark the complete part of this chapter. Let's just go into options here, and we're going to do one maximum backup. I just don't like to have a lot of backups clogging things up. There we go. So we're going to save that. Okay, so we're going to be ready to go, and we're going to add to this template throughout this part of the course. So what are some best practices? Well, we always want to start with the correct template, metric or imperial. We talked about that and the reasons for that. I also wanted to talk about here was don't fill up your template with too much stuff. And this speaks to the next point, which is don't spend a lot of time setting up your template and trying to foresee every scenario. Setting up a template should be under a day, maybe a few hours to do, and you should be off to the races. And then as you go, you can tweak it. And then for the next project, you'll have yet a better template and on and on and on. Okay, so let's go through some key points here. Project settings, so we can set the units and we can set things like line styles. So here in Revit, I'm going to go to my units first. So I'll go to Manage. A lot of the stuff for setup is found under Manage. And then I'll go to Project Units. And here we go. So this is largely based on metric because that was the template that I actually saved as. So everything seems to be fine here, but I'll just click on it to show you what else there is. You can choose lots of different options. Usually it's millimeters or feet and fractional inches. And then you can choose the rounding and unit symbols. Usually you can keep this fairly high accuracy. Like for instance, if we were in imperial feet and fractional inches, we might want to go to the nearest 32nd, even though you might not build to that. You still may want to have that available at your fingertips at all times. Revit is accurate. This is just sort of what is it going to be displaying to you most of the time. We're going to go with millimeters and we won't round those off. 1 millimeter is pretty tight, so we'll just say okay to that. So that's that part of the units. Revit has separate units control for each type of unit. For instance, your areas you could show in something different like hectares or square centimeters or whatever is to your liking. It also has the angle, which has degrees, decimal degrees, as well as degrees, minutes, seconds. You also have slopes. If I click on slope, you'll notice here that there's a number of different conventions that are used throughout the world. And if you're doing roof slopes, it might be a 1 in 12 inch, or it might be a ratio of 1 in 12, rise and run. You just pay attention to this because if you say ratio to 12 versus rise in 12 inches, sometimes that can be a little bit deceptive. So just make sure you know which one you're picking. and you should be all fine there. I would leave that as decimal degrees. That's standard convention most places. And then you have currency. You tend to want to set this up, whether it's euros or pounds or dollars, you can just have that set and away you go. This here is also how you group things, how you group the symbols, so that can be changed. What about things like line styles? Well, that can be adjusted. Revit is set up quite good out of the box. You really shouldn't have to do much with line styles and line weights. That's all right here. So you have things like, for instance, line patterns, and you can bring in new line patterns. You can create new ones, and this is just a matter of saying a dash of a particular length, 1 millimeter, and then a space of 1 millimeter, and then a dot. This is quite nice to have. You could create a new line style, call it number one, or call it dash dot custom or something, and then away you go. And it'll actually give you a little bit of guidance on how this is supposed to be made. So I think they're expecting me to put a space, and then I'm all set. Okay, so I put a space in here, and can give it the length, and okay, so there's my number one line pattern. Now, if I go back into additional settings, you also have line weights. We'll get back to where the line patterns fits in a second. Line weights, this is all set up. I really wouldn't recommend changing this very much, but if you really have to, you can go through here and change at what scale. How thick is a number one line at a 1 to 10 scale? So previously in AutoCAD, it'd be like red is this thickness. So red or yellow would be different thicknesses, and then what Revit does is it adds the different scales. So a number one line is just designated number one. At a 1 to 200 is 0.1 millimeters, but at 1 to 10 it's 0.18, so it's considerably larger there. And you can go through this and tweak that if you need to. Now if I go to additional settings again, you can go to line styles. And this is combining the two, both the line weight and the actual line style that you made, or the line pattern that you made. So if I go to modify subcategories, I can click on new, and we could call this one custom line. Not very inventive, but let's just go with that for now. Call it custom line, and we can choose the size of line, the thickness that we want, one being the thinnest. You don't really want to go up much past 6. So I'll go with number 2. We can change the color. Again, probably want to leave that at black. And then the line pattern, that's the one that we made. We made one called number 1, and okay. Now if we were to draw a line, that line would be available to us. Custom line. We zoom into it, you can see that's the line that we made. Okay, let's spend a little bit of time with object styles, and this is a visibility or graphics setting. So as you draw things like a wall, again, this is set up to AIA standards, which is a fairly good convention. And you can see that a wall, when cut, is a particular thickness and at a particular scale. So if you want to change that, if you need to change that, you can, and that's found under Manage, and then Object Styles, which is found right here. If you click on Object Styles, what it does is it has model objects, annotation objects, and other objects as well. And you could go through, for instance, two walls, and we could say, okay, when it's cut, I want it to be a 10. I'm going to exaggerate it right now. And in projection, it's still a 1. So if you can see it, but you're not cutting it, it's a number 1. Okay, so you can see this turns into a black blob because we've just made it way too thick of a line weight. So let's go back to Object Styles and find Walls. It's a number 3. One thing in here that I will show you, Object Styles, and then annotation objects. The callout boundary, some people like to beef that up. Let's do that for our template. We'll put it at a number 4 to start. And let's go back in there again to object styles, annotation objects, callout boundary. Let's also make the line pattern a little bit different. So let's go with a center line, a couple to choose from there. I think they're mostly the same. We'll say, okay, let's do a little sample. And we'll go with a callout. Now, as we stretch that out, we can see that it does have a line weight to it. We may later want to adjust that line weight, but at least now the callout stands out a little bit more. I usually like to do that. Views are something that generally you're not going to be doing a lot of setup on this beforehand. So all of your views in your project browser, these are going to carry through. and just the basic. You just want to keep it very basic right from the beginning. Some people will create a drafting view that's kind of a starting point. So they may go to View, Drafting View, and they might call this Starting View. And then they might put in some notes in there. So it might put in some text and say project team notes. Some people will use this drafting view as a starting view, kind of as like a low-tech bulletin board. It's under Manage, and then it's under Starting View. You can just click on that, and then we can go down and pick this drafting view and say that's the starting view. Let's save that. Every time the file opens, it'll open up onto the project team notes. Project information. This is something that's project specific. I'm going to show you where it is, but it's not something you really set up in the template. Right here under Manage again, and then Project Information. This is where you can set things like the author, the issue date. This will be reflected in the title block. But again, it's probably something you want to just do when you open up the template as a project file. Now, families, this is where we talked about earlier. You want to be careful. You really don't want to load too much into your template. You don't want to have too much set up because then people have to purge things constantly and get rid of what's been set up. So you want to set up some basic things, especially a title block. That's great. But keep in mind, everything is a family. So there could be a lot of setup, a lot of wasted time if you're not careful. Let's just flip back over to Revit and we'll walk through those things. As far as title blocks are concerned, we can go to Insert, and this is with all families. You can go to Insert, Load Family, and then you can go through and find your title blocks. These are the imperial sizes, which many title blocks are in North America. Even if you are working in metric, a lot of times you will use an imperial size title block because of the paper sizing. So I could go to pick the one that I want. Now that's been loaded in. And if someone were to go to Sheets, so if they were to start a new sheet, right-click on Sheets, New Sheet, there would be the one that has been loaded in. They could say OK, and there's the title block ready to go. Now you can make your own title blocks. We're going to do that in another video. Keep in mind that everything is a family, so in some places, depending on what you do, you may want to set up your wall families. So I may want to click on Wall, click on Edit Type, Duplicate, make a standard wall style that we use. That's something that we'll get into in another video. Included in the families are going to be all of these bubbles. If you go to an elevation view, you can see here, those are families. I'm going to explain all of these in detail throughout this chapter. Okay, so with that, let's move on. You've seen the basic overview of what a template file is, and we'll keep refining this as we go. Okay, so now that we have a metric template, let's also do the same for an imperial template. So I'm going to go to the application menu. I'm going to go to Open, and then I'm going to go to Project. And we're going to go to our standard templates, which can be found under, usually I just click on something like Imperial Library. I may even go up a level, and then I'll look in sort of the standard folders here, just so I don't have to navigate through. You can see that's where it is there, RAC 2012. And then we're going to be looking for templates. There we go. And then we'll start with US Imperial, sure. And we'll go just with the standard default. We'll open that one up. And we're going to make this one our own. So let's go in here and let's just do a Save As template. And we're going to go to our folder. And we're going to make this one 201 Imperial complete. Let's just make sure we've only got one autosave. And then we'll save that. And even if you do save it, again, I want to reiterate that it's not going to save it as a project file. It will always stay as a template file. It's not until you say File, Application Menu, New Project, and then browse to the one that you made. That's when it'll sort of convert itself or take all of its settings and put it into an RVT as opposed to an RTE. Okay, so we're still in this template file. Let's do a couple little things. We're going to go to Manage, and we're going to go to Object Styles, and we're going to go over to Annotation Objects, call out Boundary, and let's just make that a 4. We'll make a little sample view callout just to confirm that we like that, maybe zoom in. Not very heavy. We might want to make that just a touch heavier. Let's go to Manage, Object Styles, Annotation Objects. Let's just go maybe to a 6. Okay, that's good and heavy. It stands out. Let's also make a starting view in this one. So we'll go to View, Drafting View. And just call this one Starting View. You can call it anything you want. We're going to also put in some text here, just a label so we can see that. Project notes. Always nice to keep some notes. And then what we'll do is go to Manage. We'll go to Manage Project and click on Starting View, and we will pick this one as our starting view. Let's save that. And now we have a Imperial template completed as well for our project.